This video is sponsored by THQ Nordic. Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're taking a look at the Valiant, a medieval squad-based RTS set in the 13th century across Europe and the Middle East. If you're interested in learning more about the game beyond this video, or perhaps picking it up for yourself, don't hesitate to use the link in the description and pinned comment down below, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask away in the comments, and I'll answer all that I can. Please note that this video is not a review in any way, shape, or form, but an overview of what you can expect from the game. Its setting, its mechanics, and how it tries to stand out from the crowd. With all that said, and with timestamps down below to jump around as you'd like, let's not waste any more time. Let's begin. The story at hand. Starting with a prologue set in the Middle East, the Valiant introduces us to our protagonist Theodoric von Ackenberg and antagonist Ulrich von Grievel, brothers in arms fighting in the Crusades side by side at this point in time. During an offensive, they come across some ruins and hidden within them, a relic. Things quickly deteriorate as the relic seems to corrupt our hero's friend Ulrich, and before we know it, we're taken just over a decade ahead in time, where Ulrich has risen to some fame and stature thanks largely in part due to the relic they discovered so many years ago. Meanwhile, Theodoric has decided to leave his life of war and fighting behind. All is going well until a monk pays Theodoric a visit one rainy night, telling him the true strength of the relic they'd found all those years ago, and the fact that it is but one part of three. Whomsoever holds all three might put all of humanity in grave danger, and Theodoric must quest to find the remaining pieces before his old friend Ulrich does. The Valiant is a historical RTS where the setting plays an important backdrop to a character-driven story that takes you through Europe and the Middle East as you race against an old friend across 15 handcrafted missions, crossing paths with fictional heroes from different parts of the continent, hunting down marauders and bandits and Saracens alike. And though it uses historicity to ground all of its units, conversations, and aesthetics, the core conflict of the game explores some of the more religious aspects of the era, exploring the meaning and power of relics and faith, without going overboard, without making it feel like a high fantasy adventure. There's a darkness to how the story is told, giving it a sense of gravitas as you see bodies pile up across multiple skirmishes on the same map, choke points flooding with the blood and bodies of the fallen. Full voice acting over illustrated and in-engine cutscenes alike help the game constantly set a tone, somber and dire, yet with an inkling of hope that there are still forces of good even amidst all the bloodshed. As you travel from place to place and meet new characters, friend and foe alike, these moments are punctuated by narration and journal entries from the monk who came to you with a quest. The writing in this game, both in terms of mission story beats and narrated elements, give a real sense of adventure. You're a chivalrous knight on a grand quest, meeting people from many nations with different backgrounds, often distracted at times by local plights and the troubles of the small folk. At times, I felt as though I was a character in a tabletop RPG as far as the story and character development was concerned. With that said, the Valiant is, mechanically speaking, a squad-based RTS primarily, but the RPG elements and storytelling make it a character and narrative-driven experience. Role-playing real-time strategy. Real-time strategy games these days are often looking for ways to introduce elements from other genres to spice things up, and the Valiant draws from the pool of RPG systems to go with its rather character-driven approach. The prologue is presented as tutorialized opening missions, though there are explanations of how specific units and new mechanics work as they get uncovered through more missions down the line, well after the game has entered its main story arc. The map gives you some context as to where your next mission is taking you, and it lets you revisit old missions and replay them to get any XP you left on the table, to try at a harder difficulty, or perhaps with some added modifiers as challenges. The missions do get pretty tough at times, with the AI effectively using its units to counter yours and even taking advantage of the opportunity to ambush or surprise your troops, so the added challenges are a fun way to make things even tougher on yourself if you desire. After selecting a mission, but before you begin, you'll have the opportunity to upgrade your hero characters using accumulated XP, exploring 3 tracks of upgrades that you can reset and adjust at any time before a mission as needed. These unlocks include passive and active abilities, as well as stat buffs, upgrades to certain unit types, or banners that give an AoE buff to a bunch of units. Apart from skills, you can also tweak your hero's gear before they start a mission. Gear is picked up during missions, and each hero character has an armor slot, a weapon slot, and an accessory slot. These can all be swapped around not just for the visual impact as your hero's model changes, but also to provide a variety of buffs or perhaps even additional special abilities that can turn the tide of engagements. Choosing the right gear for the right hero and ensuring you have the right combination of gear across heroes becomes another strategic consideration as you start to collect more and more, and again, you can completely miss some of the gear pickups if you're not paying attention during a campaign mission. So there's the added variable to your playthrough if you're not thorough, either by choice or in error. You also get to pick and choose which units you want to start the mission with. You'll typically have a very limited number of starting units, with more joining you or being recruited mid-mission, and their abilities vary greatly as we'll discuss in a moment, so who you choose to start a mission with can make quite a big difference. The starting units available to you are determined by how far along the story you are, but you're free to mix and match as you wish and feel comfortable, again allowing you to make your first genius strategic decisions or perhaps blunders. There's a traditional RTS structure to each of the missions too, oftentimes slowly uncovering the map or introducing reinforcing units and characters driven by story elements and beats, but some missions take a fairly open-ended approach, allowing you to tackle objectives and sub-objectives as you see fit, allowing you to make mistakes, overextend, and course-correct. Sometimes your missions will include extremely light base building, asking you to collect and spend resources to put up structures like watchtowers and barricades, to grant extra range or to slow enemy approaches down, etc., etc. They're only available though when you've acquired a workshop during the mission. Meanwhile, the replenishment camp gives you access to unit recruitment and replenishment, and you can even find pickups strewn about on some maps, equipment that adds a new ability to the unit that got the pickup, though they typically only have a limited number of uses, especially to balance how powerful they can be at times, like the throwing axes that can punch through a bunch of units in a straight line. A successful mission rewards you with XP for your characters and points out which medals you've earned through accomplishing various feats. It also lets you see what new gear you've picked up on the mission too, and how many you left behind. As stated previously, you can always go back to an old mission to try and find or earn what you missed, or to simply make it more challenging for yourself, or in fact, to try it with a completely different starting unit. But that's just how single player works. Multiple multiplayer modes. The Valiant extends beyond its 15 single-player missions and the challenges you can go back to play them all with. 2 multiplayer modes allow for competitive and cooperative play alike, keeping the game alive beyond its story in a few different formats. The competitive format pits up to 4 players against each other in 1v1s and 2v2s, where each player picks one of the hero characters as the backbone to their session, leading their forces against enemy players and AI alike. Custom games can be set up privately or publicly to be played across one of the 4 maps available at launch, and then there's the option to play ranked matches to compete for leaderboard positions, as well as unranked, match-made quick matches. There is XP to be gained by completing challenges, and lots of cosmetic customization options that you can apply to your profile or to your heroes and units alike as you unlock the, again, plethora of options. Matches themselves will be in a format familiar to anybody who has played Company of Heroes type games before. There are points to capture in order to generate resources, specifically wood and gold, and then there are points to capture to drain the enemy's influence, victory points, if you will. The one who holds more of these victory points speeds more quickly towards, you guessed it, victory, and the maps are designed in a way that takes advantage of quite a few of the tactical mechanics that we'll be discussing shortly. You'll be hiding in tall grass, laying ambushes and traps, concerning yourself with scouting and unit placement, all while spending resources not just to recruit more units, but also to research upgrades for them and their abilities, and upgrades for the resource gathering buildings as well as your army's size. Apart from this traditional mode of multiplayer, the Valiant also has a mode called Last Man Standing, which is a 3-player cooperative mode that can only be played with other players. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to dive into it just yet, but the concept sounds quite interesting. Each player picks a hero squad, and they control only that squad alongside their friends who are also controlling their own single squads, and it's all in an attempt to defend 3 supply wagons against 15 waves of enemies that naturally grow stronger with each wave. You'll gain XP, upgrades, and war gear as you proceed through the waves, and any hero that's killed will return after a short bit of time, though if all 3 hero squads are dead at the same time, that's game over. There's a pressure to operate quickly to maximize your experience gain multipliers, and you want to try and be a proactive member of the team to help collect said XP as much as possible. Apart from simply killing enemies and defending supply wagons, you'll go around grabbing pickups and planning your gear and talent upgrades to make sure you survive all 15 waves. Your heroes will accumulate levels the more you play this mode, and you can take these upgrades between games to perform better and better in future attempts, a type of persistence that should make the wave-based gameplay a bit more interesting than a simple rinse and repeat with prayers for good RNG. But we've had talk of heroes and units and upgrades and talents. What does this all mean? Let's take a look at some of the mechanics that you'll be engaging with as you play in either single or multiplayer game modes. Unit variety and depth. The Valiant has your typical spread of medieval units to use and fight against. Swordsmen, spearmen, archers, cavalry, crossbowmen, axemen, etc., etc. Though there's only a handful of unit types that you can field, there's a great deal of depth to each unit and how they operate or are otherwise best used. There's a base level rock, paper, scissors kind of situation, as you might expect, where, archers are terrible in melee, units with shields have some degree of defense against ranged units, and spears are best against cavalry. But it's not so straightforward as always finding counters and chasing them down or avoiding them. Sometimes, units that would typically falter against a particular target is still able to help against them, or units that are best used against a certain type of enemy unit can perform even better under certain not-so-ideal specific circumstances. The archers, for example, can use their volleys to slow incoming charges down, and crossbowmen can similarly place traps to slow enemy units down too. Or, placing spears in the path of a trampling cavalry unit will cause a huge amount of damage to the cavalry, even though the spears will get knocked down and taken out temporarily. This adds a bit more of a variable, dynamic feel to how units operate over the simple matter of, again, rock, paper, scissors, and all the unit abilities and layers of stats add to it. Some unit abilities are, in a way, passive. These are called talents, like how swordsmen have the ability to assault the enemy, causing a great deal of damage on initial impact as long as they're the ones running in. Other abilities are active. They cost vigor, have a cooldown, and allow units to charge from point to point, knocking enemies down en route. It allows units to pin enemies in place with thrown javelins, or perhaps it allows units to slow enemy units down under archer fire. Some cancel others, like a cavalry unit that's attempting to trample through your front lines into your archers can be pinned in place by spearmen throwing javelins, canceling their trample special ability. Some should be avoided under certain circumstances, as mentioned previously, like how sending cavalry trampling through spears will knock them down, sure, but only after your cavalry eats a great deal of damage. All of this is happening while managing a variety of unit stats. Every unit has fortitude, a layer of armor, so to speak, absorbing damage done to a unit and protecting their HP. Fortitude regenerates for most units when they're outside of combat, though some units like the Axemen have special abilities that let them regenerate it by dealing damage, while other units like the War Priest can help regenerate Fortitude too. Either way, once depleted, a unit's HP starts to take direct damage, and individuals within the unit start to die. HP can only be replenished at replenishment camps, so you really need to keep an eye on Fortitude to make sure HP is minimally affected as much as possible. Vigor, meanwhile, is an expendable resource that's used by units when they trigger their special abilities, and though you'll feel like you have plenty in the earliest missions, you very quickly learn that it's a resource that needs to be managed well, and you can't just spam unit abilities as you wish. Discipline, meanwhile, is a stat that slowly drains when in melee, and its effects are unit dependent. Spearmen cause more damage the more discipline they have, which means they start very efficient in melee, but as that discipline drops over time, so too does their damage output. It then takes some time out of melee to replenish. Bloodlust, meanwhile, is a bar that fills while in melee and helps units like the Axemen cause more damage the longer they're engaged with the same target. You can see how units are a lot more than the weapons they carry, and a lot more than the typical spears beat cavalry conversation. Some of these units are further upgraded over time, evolving in many ways, and otherwise being bolstered in combat by your heroes. Hero characters and elite squads. Heroes in the Valiant are still mortals surrounded by others in their unit. Their heroism is through battlefield deeds, and apart from skill trees and equipment slots as discussed previously, they have a few other unique elements that make them stand out from the regular units. For one, heroes engaged in combat will gain vengeance over time, and when filled, it will allow them to use a powerful ability to cause a greater deal of damage. In many cases, it's as straightforward as an area of effect around the hero that's hit with a huge amount of damage, but in other cases, it can be a bit more involved, like fire arrows that are specifically effective against enemy fortitude. Even these specials that take some effort to charge up aren't just an easy one-size-fits-all. They have an ideal use case scenario and times that you might be just a little too late to get the full benefit of their use. Vengeance typically drains when out of combat, so making use of it is a matter of staying alert, well-positioned, and proactive. It asks you to be aggressive and to go from engagement, to use your heroes like heroes, engaging in battle rather than playing it safe. Apart from these special abilities, heroes derive more abilities from their inventory items. These can include things like knocking the enemy down when in melee, or increasing the depleted fortitude of allied units in an area of effect, keeping them alive and fighting for longer. Picking the right equipment for your heroes as such is essential. The right ability on the right class of hero at the right moment can completely turn the tide of battle. And beware, you're not the only one with these higher-end units. In multiplayer, of course, your opponents will have their hero characters as well, but in single player too, enemy heroes and elite units will cause you much trouble. They'll have more health, and they'll have special abilities that they'll use to try and break you too. The AI makes very good use of not just its abilities and units, but also the terrain, and typically the numerical advantage they have. To overcome an enemy like this, you need to rely on your tactical prowess. While you'll sometimes find yourself in situations where the speed of your clicks will make a difference, the Valiant is hell-bent on making sound tactics matter more than clicks per millisecond. Laying your units out in appropriate formations and moving them accordingly makes a world of difference. Approaching the fog of war with caution is always a good idea. Keeping an eye out for ambushes and scouting the trees and tall grass is extremely important. There are a lot of moving parts here. Positioning around buildings and terrain will hide units, and even when you see the enemy, you'll first see them marked with question marks before the actual unit type is revealed. You can opt to sneak around to see how many you're up against, or perhaps exactly what you're up against, and plan accordingly. Outnumbering the enemy obviously has its advantages, but sometimes a hero's traits might make them more capable when outnumbered themselves, and so you'll want to engage the enemy accordingly as well. It goes beyond individual units though, as terrain itself plays a key role throughout your engagements. Units hiding in tall grass or in forests can surprise enemy units with an ambush, freezing them in place and preventing them from causing any damage temporarily, while simultaneously causing more damage too. But that's not all. Units take and deliver less ranged damage when hiding among the trees of a dense forest, and they're unable to charge or trample. While that stops you using those abilities, it also protects you from the enemy that would use them too. You can see clearly how the game encourages the use of such tactics, the use of terrain, especially on higher difficulties, as the AI will take advantage of loose footing or inopportune placement and absolutely punish you. Siege engines can also not enter forests naturally, and so sometimes you'll have to split your troops up accordingly, trying to take advantage of what the terrain has to offer, while also leaving some units potentially exposed. All these tactical decisions come together with the strategic decisions of which starting units to bring, which equipment to carry, and which units to recruit, and which structures to build, when, and where. It all gives you a lot to think about at all levels, and again, it prioritizes your tactical and strategic thinking over how quick you click. The Valiant is available now, and if you want to learn more or grab the game for yourself, check out the link in the pinned comment and description down below. If you have any questions, again, ask away and I'll answer all that I can. For more strategy gaming news, reviews, let's plays, and more, don't hesitate to subscribe. And as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. They'll keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.